Good evening. Good evening. My name's Professor Martin. I'm Martin Clammer. I'm professor of English here at Luther College, and as folks know, I've been a long time associated with the Paideia program, and I'm also editor of McIlrath, which is the faculty journal which publishes some of the writings and lectures of faculty. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers for tonight in the topic of Invisible Battles of Ordinary Moms, Stories of Disability Advocacy in Iowa. Professor Anita Carrasco came to Luther in 2011, having done her undergraduate work in her home country of Chile and her master's in cultural applied anthropology and PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Arizona. She has published considerably in her time since she arrived at Luther, including her book published in 2020, Embracing the Anaconda, a chronicle of Atacameño life and mining in the Andes. She teaches a variety of courses in anthropology, including Introduction to Cultural Anthropology, Environmental Anthropology, Ethnography, Anthropological Theory, and so forth. So we're very happy to have Professor Carrasco with us this evening. Also speaking in this collaborative faculty-student effort will be Grace McIlrath, who is a double major in anthropology and Nordic studies, graduating this year, and also providing the artwork and joining for the Q&A is in the audience now, Grace Pitsenbarger, who is a major in art. So this looks like a very interesting evening. Thanks for coming out, and now invite Anita to come to the podium.
Hello, good night. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to be speaking with you tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and that always makes me feel safer and happier. And so thank you for coming out tonight. This is a collaboration, so we are going to give this presentation as a duo, and we're gonna be taking turns here on the stage. And so, welcome. Okay, so mothers of children with disabilities going through their parenting journeys, seeing a very different family portrait. They expect sporting events and family vacations, but those aren't a given. They have to reevaluate their own perspective on life. And so the question really becomes, what is a life worth living? These mothers spent many years in isolation, unable to break from the endless appointments, therapies, meetings. They picked small fights and together forged a great chain. As Martha Jablow, a historic disability advocate, said, quote, "More than all the statistics, charts, and research data, personal stories that tell the real truth can move mountains and change lives," end quote. Through our book about mothers of children with disabilities, we are hoping to provide a space for other mothers to learn about women like them, fighting for their children's rights, and to bring greater awareness to their unseen advocacy and leadership. This is a very, very brief backstory into maternal advocacy. So amidst the fight for suffrage, it was women who founded the United States Bureau in Children's Bureau in 1912. The first director was Julie Lathrop, the first woman to ever head a United States Federal Bureau. Serving under her was Grace Abbott, a pioneer for child labor rights and later a director of the Child Labor Division of the U.S. Children's Bureau. Martha May Elliott was a pediatrician and a specialist in public health, an assistant director of the World Health Organization, and an architect of New Deal and post-war programs for maternal and child health. These are some of the women that are part of a larger hidden story of disability advocacy. This movement has continued to fight for healthcare benefits for all Americans with disabilities, quietly serving the entire country. Today, women have far more opportunity than their predecessors, yet they continue to make up the majority of maternal child health leaders and practitioners. These women leaders we interviewed form part of a historical trend that suggests that gender continues to have a substantial impact on the priorities pertaining to advocacy on behalf of children with disabilities. Specifically, all the women we interviewed took part in the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute, IFLTI, which was developed to provide parents and caregivers of children with special healthcare needs the opportunity to develop leadership and advocacy skills. In this training, each participant or each parent is tasked with the goal of developing a project that benefits the disability community beyond the needs of their own child. These women and the occasional father have created nonprofit organizations, developed programs to educate first responders, changed legislation, and more. Along the way, they have also created lifelong friendships with other people who understand what they're going through. Julie Beckett was the leading figure of the disability movement in rural America before her passing in 2022, and crucial to any discussion about disability advocacy in Iowa. Julie used to advise, make sure you're at the table, even if you're not invited, get to the table. A resident of Cedar Rapids, Julie Beckett's advocacy began when she fought to remove the bureaucratic red tape that prevented her from caring for her daughter, Katie, at home. At 6 months old, Katie had viral encephalitis, a serious infection that causes inflammation of the brain. The infection resulted in a paralyzed diaphragm, significantly affecting her ability to breathe on her own. The doctors performed a tracheotomy to insert a tube in her throat, and for the rest of her life, she used a ventilator to help her breathe. Katie spent the next 3.5 years living in St. Luke's Methodist Hospital. Medicaid took over coverage of Katie's care after her parents' private insurance hit the $1 million benefit limit. At the time, the Medicaid program only supported hospital-based care, meaning her care would not be covered if she was discharged home. Katie's hospital care was about $12,000 per month, but costs could drop to about $2,000 if Julie was allowed to care for her daughter at home with the help of home health nurses. Julie Beckett was not one to give up. So, in 1981, she contacted Rep. Thomas Talkey for support to pass the Katie Beckett waiver. This legislation established a federal program that allowed individuals with disabilities to use Medicaid dollars to get health care while living at home. In an interview with Joseph Shapiro from NPR, Senator Tom Harkin, one of the chief authors of the Americans with Disability Act, said that Julie's daughter, Katie, was a symbol of what the disability rights law set out to establish. Quote, "It's about making sure that we don't separate out people with disabilities, but make them part of the families, making them part of the communities, part of the schools, just an integral part of society." That's what Katie Beckett fought for all her life. Julie Beckett was also a driving force behind legislation like the Family Opportunity Act, embracing a family-centered model that acknowledged the roles of family members in care. In '92, she founded Family Voices, a national nonprofit organization that brought together families of children with disabilities who were advocating for healthcare reform. This organization established family-to-family health information centers, which are federally funded resources that now exist in all 50 states and in 5 US territories. While Julie was alive, she would visit every Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute cohort to impart her wisdom. She would soothe the insecurities the participants felt about their leadership potential, whether that be their education, their money, or their intelligence. Julie's response to those fears were, "You don't have to be rich, loud, or famous to make a difference. I was just a mom, and I did the right thing."
Through our conversations with the mothers, a few ideas popped up again and again. The foremost thing was guilt. The mothers felt responsible for their child's condition, even though all of the disabilities present in our interviews were not related to preventable causes. Did they drink too much pop? Did they skip one too many prenatal vitamins? Or take one too many aspirins? And as Jillian Kaufman, one of the mothers, explains, as a mother, you're the one that's responsible for them in those first 9 months. Feel like somehow it was during that time that something could have been different. It could have resulted in something else, and the disability might be different, or not even there. Guilt stretches beyond the womb. Have I done enough? One of the great burdens of advocacy is there's always more work to be done, and there are always things that may have needed to be done differently. Satisfaction is temporary. We used a phrase, baptism by fire, to express a shift in perceptions that happens when you have a child with a disability. It is a world full of challenges that goes largely unseen until you've felt the heat. You live with blinders on. All of the women recognize a change in themselves after their child is born. As Allison Drew puts it in her interview, I had to have a complete perspective change. I had to realize that I did not have a choice. It doesn't really matter what other people think. If they're staring at you because your kid is screaming, they don't know your story, and they don't know what's going on. We have to push through that gaze together and try not to let it sway how we parent our kids. If my son was having a fit in public, I would get really anxious and become short and impatient with him because it was embarrassing. Eventually, I just had to switch my mindset. When disability becomes part of your life, you must learn to shift your perspectives and to ignore the disapproving gaze bearing down upon you. Batman syndrome refers to how the women largely go at things alone and often find it challenging to seek out help. They're the ones who handle the doctor's appointments, the therapies, the individualized education plans. The fathers get cast as Thomas Wayne, important for the backstory, but not much more. The mothers do everything. Alongside that is Robin by proxy, usually called glass child syndrome. That's less fun. The typically developing children in these families often get put into the role of a third parent. They're the dustpan, quietly picking up the dust and placing it in the trash after the mother sweeps. The U.S., whether we acknowledge it or not, is a culturally Christian nation. It plays a strong influence in how we perceive things, such as suffering and enduring challenges. Most of the women we interviewed were in some shape or form Christian, and their religiosity manifested in their narratives. There's an underlying Job motif, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers mentality. God has delivered you a disabled child because he knew you would overcome. We were able to go a bit deeper into how Christianity affects how disability is interpreted by reading Angel Unaware by Dale Evans Rogers. In her memoir about her daughter with Down syndrome, she takes the perspective of her child, who then delivers a message to her parents in the 2 years she lived on Earth. Humans worry too much. If they could just trust more and worry less, they'd have heaven on earth. There is no neat metaphor for disability, certainly not one that encapsulates the experiences of caregiving without in some shape or form moralizing the experience. The mothers are not Jesus carrying the cross, because that casts the one in need of care as a burden. We may use the metaphor of Batman to explain their independence, but the mothers are not superheroes, they're regular people. It's that same gradual realization that you come to understand growing up, that your parents are not some higher being with superior intellect. They're humans as mortal and fallible as you. On the most basic level, caregiving requires you to become comfortable with the bodily fluids of another person, a deeply intimate experience. All parents must be comfortable with vomit, poop, and all that jazz, but there's an expected time limit to it. At some point, those babies will become functioning people who will care for themselves. That is not a given for parents of children with disabilities. They may still be changing diapers when their kids are 25. On a larger level, there is a breakdown of social milestones. Suddenly, the women find themselves with no idea what the future holds for them and their child. The progress we have seen for disability advocacy in Iowa began with a woman simply wanting her daughter to come home. Julie Beckett fought for her daughter and all children with disabilities to have the right to be home. The privatization of Medicaid in the state of Iowa has undermined that right. As Dawn Graber's story illustrates, her daughter, who required 24-hour nursing care, had her hours reduced by MCOs, managed care organizations, looking to cut costs. Dawn and her husband had to choose between keeping her daughter at home with her family as skilled nursing care dwindled, or move her to a facility 2 hours away, where she would be guaranteed skilled nursing care up to the age of 30. No parent should have to make that decision. That's why we did away with institutions and the Katie Beckett waiver was established. A home is not a privilege. These battles are never ending, and even after major victories, like the Katie Beckett waiver, one must hold their ground. We mustn't get complacent because administrations change, and with them, their agendas and interests.
This book is an accumulation of 2 years of research through Luther College's summer program for student-faculty collaboration. There was a twofold benefit to this program, which is that the student gets one-on-one immersion in the discipline, in this case anthropology, and the faculty can conduct research. Anthropologists, in the simplest terms, approach problem by talking with the people involved, and it is important to mention that the reason this particular project came to fruition is in part because of our own individual experiences with disability. We were not blank slates, but regardless, we started our process poring over previously published work, both creative, nonfiction, and academic articles, to immerse ourselves in as many aspects of the disability and caregiving world as we could before heading into interviews that would become the stories in the book we hope to publish. When we say interview in the anthropological context, it's more of a conversation with an inquisitive listener than an interrogation. This woman agreed to tell their stories, and our job was to provide prompts to guide their stories to air. The orally told story has the ability to capture some of the raw soul that memoir does not. Brittany Funston, one of the women, admitted, quote, "That's the first time I've ever actually said it out loud." Jillian Kaufman tearfully said, "I haven't talked about this in a while." There is a power to speaking deep emotions aloud. The greatest challenge we faced centered around maintaining the women's stories and balancing our role in telling them. We had to grapple with what our role in the narrative was going to be. We knew we couldn't fully divorce ourselves, but we also wanted to maintain the mothers as the protagonists. What parts of us are important to the story? It is crucial in those stories that the women were speaking to people with lived experiences. There was also the question of how much we edit the stories. Obviously, they had to be readable, but what is necessary and what isn't? When is just a jest, and when does it express something greater? Words matter, and we need to remember that when we edit others' words. In the second year working on the book, we put a newfound focus on collaboration. As Julie Beckett used to say, quote, "Never burn a bridge because you don't know when you may need to cross it again." These women have taken that to heart and have used it to do great things. We used their ethos to build a collaborative project with two artists, Professor of Art Richard Merritt, there you are, and Gray Pitsenbarger. We had them listen to the interviews to gather the inspiration for the illustrations that would accompany each story. In our collaboration, we learned that the role of the artist is deeper than what is on the page. People misrepresent art as something that is easy, or they reduce it to just putting marks on a page. It was fascinating to see them work with the material in the interviews, to put those stories to canvas, and to defend their thematic choice around the concept of hope. There's more than one way to tell a story, and sometimes a story is best told through multiple mediums. I am the mother of a son with a disability. and I didn't know for sure, but I suspected my son was different from the age of 2. At daycare, he was the only kid who wandered off to the corner to play alone, wouldn't eat the food all the other kids devoured. He didn't speak his first word until the age of 3, and it wasn't until the 3rd grade that he began to engage in two-way conversations. After several years and multiple failed medical evaluations, we finally received a formal diagnosis when he was 7. With a diagnosis in the system, I was made aware of the Iowa Family Leadership Training Institute through my family navigator at the Child Health Specialty Clinic in Decorah. So I applied to the 2021 call. At the beginning of my training, I was asked to reflect on 2 very difficult questions. What is your gift? I thought, well, like nothing. And what personal traits do you have that can benefit or obstruct your leadership potential? And quite frankly, I still don't know the answer to these questions, but what I do know is that in the process of becoming an anthropologist, I had practiced deep listening skills. I was good at guiding people to tell me their stories. And I also recognized the great potential of the stories I heard from the other mothers in my cohort the year I did the IFLTI. We could have filled a barrel to the brim with tears. That is how this project found me, a book documenting mothers' journeys parenting a child with a disability in rural America. My biggest problem at the time was my inability to ask for help. I had a serious case of Batman syndrome. It took me a long time to recognize I needed to ask someone for help. That someone is Grace McIlrath, my anthropology student then, now my collaborator and friend.
I grew up in the waiting room. My brother has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and from a young age, I was grappling to understand things beyond my cranial development. My upbringing was, to say, atypical, because I was a stranger, disconnected from my peers. I learned to see how society creates borders between the normal and the abnormal, and now I walk the path of becoming essentially a professional stranger. When Anita asked me to reflect on why I joined the project, my first thought was, yikes. Obviously, the answer isn't as simple as, it looks good on a graduate school application, or I enjoy anthropology. It was personal, and personal in a way that I can't quite put words to. The women we interviewed are, as Julie Beckett once said, just mothers trying to do right by their kids. I wanted to know, somewhat self-indulgently, how they applied that to their non-disabled children in the waiting room. Was my strangeness a me problem or part of a pattern? If there was a pattern, why did it happen? The siblings of children with disabilities are sometimes referred to as glass children because of the way their needs are often looked through. I was an independent child. I gave myself a bedtime. I cooked myself dinner. The idea of attention both enraptured and sickened me. I needed to know if the mothers would acknowledge this in their non-disabled children. We both had our baptism by fire, which was crucial in the success of our conversations. Exploring the idea of baptism by fire has given us a greater understanding of how discrimination and the abnormal manifests in the world. It goes beyond just the world of disability. It's important to recognize that unless you feel the heat of the flames, you cannot truly begin to understand the experience of the marginalized group. But there's also a limit to it. As a sibling or as a mother of a child with a disability, we can feel that heat, but we can never walk through it. We will never be burned like a member of the community. Being an ally does not mean that you do not still have some prejudiced beliefs. And there's a lot going on in the world that we do not see, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. Whenever we have told an audience about our work with mothers of children with disabilities, people have been inspired to tell us about their connection to disability and how seen they felt by our hopes for what this book has to offer. This has become an entirely expected reaction when we talk about the project. We've had lunches go cold as a cashier tells us about how her daughter works in special education. People are starving for connection with others who are in the know. The stories we collected are 8 mothers' reports, covering a range of disabilities: autism, both verbal and nonverbal, Down syndrome, deafness, deaf-blindness, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, intellectual disabilities, and some parents simply don't have a good diagnosis. Their experiences are the data, the findings, and the perseverance of care. These stories are about mothers striving to give their children with disabilities not just a life worth living, but a world worth living in.
Okay. Now for the most important part of the talk tonight, let me introduce you to my cosmic sisters, like Nancy Baker Curtis would say. And so the first story included in our book is Nancy Baker Curtis, who we have with us in the audience, so that is an honor for me. Thank you for coming. She's a former school teacher who had to quit teaching in order to take care of and advocate for her son, Charlie. Charlie doesn't have a good diagnosis. He has intellectual and physical disabilities that impact every aspect of his life. He does not speak, and they're working on getting him to walk. Nancy goes through how she got involved with the Changing Spaces movement and how they successfully advocated for adult-sized changing tables becoming a requirement in all new public Iowan buildings. Charlie uses a diaper, and most rest stops do not have changing tables that can accommodate someone much older than a toddler. She talks about how she met with members of the Iowa government and tells the story of how she provided a picture of her son with his wheelchair next to her mother with her wheelchair and her father standing behind. She was stressing that this is about people. It worked. Darren Lovan immigrated to the U.S. from Guatemala when she was 17. She's a pastor at the Church of the Nazarene. Her second son, JB, has autism. Because of cultural and language barriers, Darren faced an extra layer of challenges to getting her son what he needed. Darren tells the story of how she learned not just to work through her own barriers, but how to also help other members of her community as well. She talks about how being handed a bunch of papers in a language she didn't understand really served as the fuel for her language learning. She started JB's Cafe in the kitchen of her church, which provides food service training to people with disabilities in a safe environment. Being a pastor, Darren weaves in how she came to understand and cope through her faith, as well as how to turn your challenges into something positive for the community. The third story included in this book is Jillian Kaufman. She studied psychology and social work in school and works as a private practice therapist. Her oldest child, Maylene, has bilateral profound hearing loss and has cochlear implants. Jillian really digs into how disability affects both the little and big things in family life. Life is busy, and it gets especially complicated when your child has to be driven to therapies and to school, especially for deaf and hard of hearing kids. She talks about the struggles of trying to find what services are available and learning how to put your foot down to get what you need. She goes through the conversations around deciding whether or not to get cochlear implants done and introducing sign language to a hearing household. She talks about the emotional side of being a disability household and how she has tried to prevent some of the challenges that arise with it. Emma Busa's journey to activism began in utero. The doctor initially said that the baby either had trisomy 13 or 18 and would die before or shortly after birth. When it turned out it was trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, the doctors assumed Emma would want to terminate the pregnancy, even going as far as to bringing abortion pamphlets with them. But for Emma, Down syndrome was a blessing. It meant her daughter, Ruby, would have a life. In her chapter, Emma goes into her unconventional route of activism to get laws changed, including making it illegal in the state of Iowa to discriminate against people with Down syndrome on donor transplant lists. She worked extensively with first responders and law enforcement to educate them on people with Down syndrome. She goes into how she's advocated for her daughter within the school system. Emma Busa is a woman who knows her power and knows how to use it.
Heather Dirks works for Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Program as the Family Support Coordinator and worked for the Iowa Deafblind Project as the Family Engagement Coordinator. She has a degree in business administration, but because of her daughter, she had to change in career path. Her daughter, Lainey, is deafblind due to genetic mutation. One is called TUBB3. It caused her vision issues and her brain malformations. She also has another genetic condition or mutation called HUWE1 that causes intellectual and learning disabilities. In her story, Heather Dirks stresses the importance of knowing your rights. She teaches you how to be successful in an IEP meeting and how to put your foot down. Don't be afraid to be the bad guy if it means your kid gets what they need. Heather also goes into the social challenges of having a child whose mental age doesn't necessarily match her physical age. She delivers a nuanced discussion of grace and grit. Brittany Funston is the embodiment of the American spirit and dream. In her early 20s, she, along with her toddler-aged son and infant daughter, were abandoned by her then-boyfriend and left homeless. Her daughter has cerebral palsy and requires high levels of support. Brittany now is a local manager of a major cell phone company and has happily remarried. Brittany's story is one of resistance. She talks about how to maintain hope and the energy to keep pushing forward despite all the challenges life throws at you. Because she was a young mom, people tried to dismiss her, but she wouldn't let them. She not only fought, but learned how to turn her burning passion into something constructive. You have to put your feelings aside and learn to butter people up, and Brittany proves what a mother's drive can do. Allison Drew is a mom from Fort Dodge. She is the program coordinator for the Regional Autism Assistance Program. She has 2 children with autism, Elliot and AJ. She's also a part of a nonprofit group called Facing Autism and other programs within her church and community. Allison is a master juggler. Though both of her kids share a diagnosis, their needs couldn't be more opposite. She goes through the struggles of getting her first kid diagnosed and having to fight her way to the diagnosis, which was both satisfying to finally have, yet also a big leap into the unknown. For her second kid, Allison discusses her denial, yet also acceptance. Her story contains a wide variety of tribulations that are familiar to those with autistic people in their lives. Dawn Graber's story goes through the surreality of coming into the disability world and how, because you are so often stuck in the position of having to fight, grief will creep up on you when you least expect it. She details her fight with the school system to get her son Sam the education he deserved. Sam has autism, is nonverbal, and has cerebral palsy. For her daughter Hannah, she describes what her experience has been with the medical system and how that changes when your child is medically complex: cerebral palsy, epilepsy, G-tube fed, and in a wheelchair. Her story has been deeply affected by recent Iowa legislation changes, forcing her to make decisions she wouldn't have preferred. Dawn's story is one of hard choices and getting back up again. This presentation is in memory of Julie Beckett.
Well, we're at the part for questions and conversations. We want to thank you tonight for listening to the stories we collected. And I also want to thank Diane Brenneman and Martha Hanley, who are in the audience, and they were my trainers at the IFLTI Institute that I completed in 2022. And it was thanks to their collaboration helping me curate, a dozen women that had participated in 10 years worth of trainings, to select a broad range of stories, disability. But what's the most important thing in my mind is that this training shifts your perspective from being trapped in like an individual, vision to a collective vision where you try to find a gap in the system, something that you can fill, to advance the rights of of people with disabilities beyond the need of your own child. So it's really, a collective, drive, and it just changes, how you see your own advocacy. It's interesting that none of the women that we talked about see themselves as leaders. I would disagree, but I don't think I've ever been more inspired than during that training. So I invite you to ask us questions and hear the students, and please don't be shy.
So I guess my question is for Grace. When I was telling my daughter Sophia that I was coming up here and talking a little bit about the amazing work that you all did, she gave me this look when I talked about the glass child syndrome or the invisible children syndrome. And I've wondered, first of all, I think she felt uncannily validated as being a sibling. Have you ever considered yourself going down the pathway of interviewing the siblings?
That's actually my senior project.
Can you give us a sneak preview, Grace?
Yeah, there's definitely. Spooky. Yeah, there's definitely. It's been interesting talking to people because a lot of them aren't aware of the term, or they are aware of the term and they're a little ashamed by it because so much of it is not just your parents not recognizing your own needs, but also yourself not recognizing your own needs. And so it's such a, one of the questions I've asked every single sibling was, is there something you wish your parents would have done differently? And the answer is no, across the board. Because they can't, it's such a hard situation where no one wants to feel like they have to make their parents, who are already doing the impossible, do a little more impossible.
In the back. Someone raised their hand.
Thank you. Hello. Well, you guys know who I am, but I am Sana. I'm a senior at Luther. As my brother and I have been growing up and being old enough to have mature conversations with my parents, something that I have come to realize is that my brother, he grew up with, probably still has an attention deficit disorder, and it was something that we never fully addressed. A part of it was stigma, and another part of it was, at the time, the medications that were available could have had very adverse effects for him during his development. So I was just curious to know if you saw any sort of perspectives like that in the families that you interviewed. Either stigmatized views on treating their disabilities, or any based on negative treatment towards, historical negative treatment towards those with disabilities or medication, anything like that.
So I have attention deficit, really, really bad. And they took one look at me as a 9-year-old and went, ooh, we think this person's smart, but they test so bad. So they slapped me on Ritalin, and it was probably a bad idea, and I wouldn't have changed a thing, and I think that's really interesting in my personal experience, I guess, and that having a learning disability was how I connected to this project. I have a learning disability and I have a tic disorder. So by that connection, I was able to understand through my own parents a less severe concept of how to parent through something like that. Because my mom figured out she had ADHD by watching me have ADHD, which is bizarre because we're not genetically related. So that was a roll of the dice lose. But overall, that one, when the medication is helpful and harmful and everything and nothing and no one knows yet, it's so tricky. And I definitely see that in a lot of the interviews we're looking at too. Like, by listening to them, like, no one knows what to do and if they're doing the right thing.
How are social workers involved in the IFTCI group organization?
Diane, do you want to?
Can you say a bit more about what you mean?
Like, how
Are they training or?
or like, how are they like heading the organization, or are they helping out, or?
No, actually, we are family members ourselves, and so we discovered across the country there are families who are training other families in leadership, and so we had some support in our Title V. We work for the University of Iowa, and so we developed this training program together, and so it's families training families, right?
And actually, the idea originated with the very little research that exists about how families of children with special health care needs are able to cope with the demands of caring for their children. And the discovery was that until a parent interacts with a parent in a similar situation, they can't move on. So the doctors will say, I don't understand it. This woman's not doing anything that I tell her to do for her child. And, you know, or is not able to cope. And she says, I just need to talk to someone who has been on this journey. So this, so the University of Iowa actually has a model in which family members journey with their professional employees. They're trained to work with families of children with special health care needs. And we saw leadership develop when we worked with them one-to-one, so we thought, let's have a training. Other states were having a training like this to encourage usually mothers to move out of that. That's, if you think of concentric circles, they're taking care of their child, but it occurs to them, some of them, that, oh, I'm not the only parent doing this. So there are other people in my community. I'd like to do something that will benefit the community or benefit the system. So we wanted to gather those mothers together and learn with them.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in art, and as I was looking at the pictures, there's the various illustrations were in kind of different styles. And so I was wondering if you might just pick a couple of them and just explain how they came about to looking the way they did.
Oh, this is my favorite. So this is the only one that's a direct print. I wanted to do a more classic style. This was the only one done as a memorial, so I wanted it to be very distinct. It's also going to be the cover of the book, theoretically here. So it's a digital illustration done in Procreate, which is just an iPad program, thrown onto the laser cutter, cut onto wood in 2 pieces. So the blue's its own block, and then the black's its own block, and they get layered, and it's a pain to get them lined up, and that made that. This piece, I did a full illustration working off of a photograph, hated it, blurred it, and it turned out really cool. So that's all digital. This one's actually a mix of pencil and digital. So I did a full pencil drawing, scanned it into the computer, set it as a like a transparentish layer, a multiply layer, and colored it really complexly. It took me forever. This one, they talked about this little toy they received as a child, like Brittany did, and it really like stuck with me from her interview. And the backgrounds are made of gel printmaking. I actually spent 4 years learning sign language in high school, so that was very poignant for me. So these are the signs for mother, activist, and leader. So those are those together, and I actually took pictures of myself doing the signs to get the hand directions like just right. Yes, yes, and she advocates for sign language use and had to bring sign language into her home. This one was another kind of digital painting. Some of my main training is in oil painting, so I took that into the digital space and worked off a photograph for this one, for the most part there. This one got weird. I brought like 5 or 6 sketches to Anita, and she's like, I like the one with the ear, which was like kind of a throwaway. I was like, oh, and I'll draw an ear. So now I have this ear, and I gotta figure out something to do with it, and yeah. So we had this like locked room with like a door that someone needed to open, like, and that was the mother's job to like give her like this connection to the outside world, and that got really like interesting as I kept working on it. So I had Grace. So I set up this whole room in our drawing studio with a side table and a chair and a book and a cup of coffee, and I made Grace sit there while I took about a dozen photos. And that's what I used as my reference to make this image. We decided that we wanted both of them because both of them cut off somewhere different, and we liked what both of them showed and what both of them didn't show, so we just kept them. And this was Nancy's. We started here. This was at the beginning of the process. I asked, what style would you like this in? And they said, and I said, what colors would you like this in? Do you want colors? Up to you. So I made a print, I made a painting, like a full oil painting that I scrapped, and all this stuff. And we ended up with the first thing I drew again, recolored and worked with for Nancy again because it was the most hopeful image. And this is where we started the train of hope through the rest of them, was, because at first I did a sad drawing because the story made me cry, so I was like, yes, a crying picture of some sort. And they went, no, this book isn't going to be readable if the pictures are sad and the stories are sad and everything's hard. No one's going to read it. So I said, okay, I'll make something a little lighter. Also, I just love this picture of Grace. I was sitting up north, like looking at water, trying to figure out how water works. But yeah, that is my in-depth tour.
Can you talk about your editing process? You mentioned it a little bit, but how did you take the written interviews into forms that are readable and make sense? How did you decide about that?
Sorry, I thought we were still talking about pictures.
What did I do? We talked a lot about it. Yeah, it was a lot of sitting there, staring at them, thinking, So our first main question was looking at how much do we include ourselves, what we said in the interview, how much can we remove ourselves from the interview, and we were lucky that the women were really good storytellers, so the transcripts that we had were largely usable stories. It was just a question of occasionally putting in context, and then, deleting some filler words here and there, but they're largely in the same form that the women said them in, just without some of the muddy bits of speech that our brains naturally filter out.
Can I add something? Actually, we were not lucky that the women were really good storytellers. It was like a part of like a really in-depth curation that Diane and some of the other trainers went through. We had like, I think, 3 Zoom meetings. There were at least 6 people in those, in those Zoom meetings, going through the rosters of all the IFLTI trainings that had happened until then. I think it was 10 or 11. So there's more than 100 grads to pick from. And so we had like lots of conversations about how many, like the range of disabilities that we wanted to represent, the diverse cultural backgrounds, the like identifying, stories of women that had changed something in the system too, beyond their own child, and also that they were articulate. There are some people that are naturally, better to tell stories than others. And I was telling Diane and Martha over a meal before we came to the lecture here that in all my experience doing anthropological research, I had never worked in a project where all the interviews were good. Like it was, we curated like guiding questions, but I would say that say Nancy, she interviewed herself, we didn't really because of this, but so like I wouldn't say we're lucky. I think it was part of like a very thoughtful process of selection of who could be good candidates for this book. So I want to thank the IFLTI trainers for that help in selecting the moms.
I am the mother of a daughter who has multiple disabilities but wasn't actually diagnosed until a senior in high school. She is considered high functioning, although doesn't like to use that term, so it's kind of a totally different struggle. She is in her 3rd year at Luther, and my question is as you guys have done this research, both as one who struggles with ADHD, which is one of the things, as a sibling, as a professor, are there other things that you can see now that could be helpful at this level for those that struggle with disabilities in college? And not just Luther specifically, obviously that's, we're here for that, but for others, and how, as parents, we can help. Are there things we can help with to help maybe make some changes here at Luther? Just those kinds of things. Like how can we help those of our children who are at this level still, but yet are not able to function in a normal school type of environment, which all of our kids do, but even at this level?
That's a big question. So, I mean, I could say a lot of things, but I want to kind of tag along with the theme of hope. I started at Luther in 2011, and when I started at Luther, this was not even a topic of conversation. We were not, really discussing this in the way that we are today. Another thing that I want to mention is that just my observation is that there are more and more educators here at the college and elsewhere that are aware of the relevance of this, that we have a diverse student body and that we can't do the same thing for everybody. Another inspiration I've had is actually the teachers that have worked with my own son, one of which is here in the room. And I asked Miss Nestaby, because she's gonna retire, and I'm like scared, like she's leaving. It's worked really well. What she would how could I help Esteban going forward now that she's going to be gone? And she said something that was so simple, but it was so true. Esteban works really well with a person that has a lot of patience and kind of a good disposition. So something as simple as being kind and being patient can go a long way. And so, like all the educators in the room, I would just say, be patient, be kind, give people the benefit of the doubt. One thing that I've learned from some of my students with disabilities is that they have to constantly become vulnerable because they have to explain why they miss class. They have to explain why, that assignment is late. They have to, and it's embarrassing, right? Because there's this sense of disbelief. And so I think that we have to believe our students and talk about this like we are today more, like not let it slip under the rug. And so I am hopeful, that the culture is changing. And I think that we can obviously do better, but we're going on the right path, I think.
And I need to take advantage of this and say thank you, because you are one of those teachers who has been a huge blessing. And I would say the majority of the teachers she has had here have been amazing and so open to working with her and others. And so I need to thank you, and I know there's another teacher that she has down there, a vocal teacher who has also been very, very amazing in her life. So thank you, Anita, for being one of those amazing teachers.
Thank you for being here tonight. There's the question.
Yeah, I think I wanted to ask about, thank you for all of this. This is really great. And the theme of collaboration is not just a theme. It's really present here in a really beautiful way. So hats off to all of you for really, really doing that and showing how great it is when you do and the kind of work that you get when you really do it. I had a question about, it seems like the choice of mothers was sort of forced on you by the presence of women caring for their children. But I wondered what some of these people themselves had to say about gender and how their experience is inflected by gender roles and gender norms and just the expectations on them as mothers. You referenced a little bit of this in the guilt, right, of being sort of held responsible. But I wonder what other reflections these people had about that positioning as mother in particular and how that related to their experience of being the parent of a child with disabilities. If that came up.
Kind of what came across is it wasn't so much that they would reflect, I mean, they would, the occasional like girl power moment joke type thing, but it was largely gender was unspoken. It wasn't felt so much in what they said, but what they didn't say. And so when we talk about guilt and we talk about the fathers, what we're talking about is the absence of what they were saying. How they may mention, there's very particular points where they may mention a father, like when we would ask them about, who has helped you, who has supported you, they'll often go, oh, my husband. But then when it comes to talking about the IEP meetings, going to the medical, seeing doctors, any of that type of stuff, it was just, they would talk I, sometimes an ambiguous we, but they would never directly say what the fathers were doing. And so the gender aspect of it is kind of like just in general society, women's work goes unrecognized, and so the gender went unrecognized in their own reflections.
Why don't we give a
give a hand to our presenters and take the rest of the conversation out to the reception where we have some snacks and cookies, and feel free to ask further questions out there. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you so much.